So the format of today is simply a short presentation, and then we will open up to questions and hopefully kind of any kind of shares and queries. So as I say, I'm going to focus on a particular aspect of how we might kind of give a lecture. And to do that, I'm going to look at basically the planning of it, the design, the actual delivery, and then the review. And that's kind of fundamental to actually being a good practitioner and kind of reflecting on one's own practice. The QR code you see there is a link to our Teaching Toolkit resource on delivering a lecture. And what you will see in the slides at the end of each slide is perhaps a little kind of URL to a reference or to a other resource. So we will share the slides after the fact, and you'll be able to kind of capture all of those if you so wish. So let us begin with the session. So planning. So I suppose one of the things that we often do when we give a lecture is we need to figure out exactly what it is we're going to do and how we're going to do it, but also where we will be. So interesting enough, this is a virtual lecture. So in terms of the considerations about the preparation, it's actually kind of figuring out exactly how you will engage your learners and how you deliver the content. So that's really important. And in terms of the what you and I shall do, it's actually important to have a key kind of strategy within our presentation. And I'll come to that momentarily in a little bit more detail. So transparency, this is really about making sure that you and I know exactly what we're here for. So my first slide was an overview, and I gave you the kind of key kind of elements about what it was we were going to tackle. So perhaps when you and I actually deliver a lecture, vis-a-vis an academic scenario, we're talking about specific objectives of a given session. And those objectives are going to relate back to the module outcomes. But most importantly, the objectives, when we talk about them, are really quite specific. And what I mean by that is that we will say that at the end of this lecture today, you will know how to plan, devise a lecture session in and of itself. So having that kind of specificity is really important for two reasons. One, it gives clarity of purpose in terms of delivery, but two, it tells the learner or the participant exactly what it is they should be able to do and glean at the end of said lecture. The other part, obviously, is the communication. So this is really important. And I suppose one of the things that we often forget in a lecture is the humanity, the kind of amiable side of it. So often we are kind of focused on delivering the content, the discipline based and such. But in reality, what we want to do is provide a little bit of a narrative journey. We want to engage our learners. And so we want to have that ability to, have kind of a two-way conversation rather than just a one-way didactic piece. And that nicely flows into the whole engagement piece. And again, this is absolutely fundamental in terms of actually how we engage with one another. So it's not only about kind of prompting questions from our group, but it's also about being responsive to what you and I see. So whether that's, in this instance, on the chat thread, or indeed the faces in the room, the virtual room, or if it's in a lecture theatre or a seminar room, it's making sure that we keep eye contact with those around us. And also that we have a little bit of flexibility in terms of the plan that we have prepared. And again, I'll come to that momentarily in terms of how that might unfold. So the actual design. So again, one of the things that many of us do is we use our slides as the kind of plan for our session. Not a bad thing in and itself, but when we really want to get into a little bit more detail, we need to think through exactly what's going to happen, how much we will kind of deliver in terms of information, how much time we will give over to activities and questions, and indeed reflection, i.e. building space into the curriculum and for our learners. So having a design is really important. But most importantly, when it comes to those slides, it's to think about the slides as really just prompts. So what you want to do is actually have that ability to free talk, to flow, to have, as I say, that narrative, that ability to actually just kind of deliver information in a really kind of succinct and clear fashion. You don't want to find yourself reading kind of detailed slides. If that's the case, those are the handouts that you deliver, hopefully prior to the lecture or perhaps after it. Multimedia. So often we use kind of multimedia to actually, deliver in-depth graphics, to have photographs, to have plans, to have flowcharts, All of these are going to be really important in terms of actually kind of explaining difficult concepts and so forth. But I suppose one of the most important things is to make sure that that media we choose is actually pertinent and relevant to what it is that we need to do. So sometimes you and I will, perhaps flick on the design switch in PowerPoint and it will throw up a design and throw up a graphic, or perhaps mangle our graphics and our images that we use. So it's to be really conscious about how the actual kind of piece looks. And that comes very much to the next point, simplicity and consistency. Ideally, keep slides really kind of simple in terms of white backgrounds and kind of clear kind of text. And this is all about delivery and kind of readability. You can see from the right of the slide there, that kind of font size and kind of recognizing what font actually works best. And obviously, the larger, the better in terms of what it was we want to deliver. But also, interestingly enough, if we go kind of large, if we go like 2836, you suddenly realize that you can't fit that much on the slide, which is actually good. The slides are there, as I say, to join what it is you and I are going to talk about and present. And that's really important. Prepare and practice. So the other thing that we often perhaps don't do enough is actually kind of run through the slides ourselves, both in terms of the actual way the slide deck will actually kind of flow, whether we want to use transitions, whether we want to bring up graphics and highlight that, but also the timing. So when you and I actually kind of take the moment to run through the slides, if we do it ourselves, we're invariably going to go quite fast. But what you need to be able to think about is, how is it that I would explain different pieces of information or difficult concepts to my learners, knowing as I look around the room or look to the kind of chats that there are kind of questions and such coming back. So when you practice with the student in mind, make it student-centered, even though they're not there. So give time and think about that. And in reality, having kind of, extra time to do that is actually much more important than kind of racing to the line and getting all the information across. And the final piece, accessibility and inclusivity. So obviously, similar concepts, but different in purpose. Accessible means that the content that we produce is actually going to be, available to a screen reader, transcripts will be available, so forth and so on. The inclusive part is making certain that the slides that we use, the design that we choose, the way that we deliver is amenable to different modes of representation and engagement on behalf of our learners. So basically making sure that there is a kind of a broad scale of content and delivery within our slides, that they're not, so similar or so same that they're going to kind of, tire people or not engage people. And that's really important too. So let's move on to the actual delivery. So in terms of delivery, obviously there's a hello, there's a greeting. So this is really kind of a nice thing to be able to do. So obviously when we do that in a lecture, you know who I am, you know why I'm here. But sometimes it's good to actually kind of start off and have a little kind of, couple of words of chat. So as I said at the beginning, just by way of introduction, I considered different kind of components about how this might happen, this particular lecture, and what it was I was going to focus on. So it's just about a little kind of, personal share, if you like. And that's the idea about opening up and giving a little bit more information to the learners about who you are and what it is you can do for them. So little mantra in terms of giving a lecture or kind of sharing any information. Tell the learners what you are going to tell them. So be clear, be specific, and make sure that they know exactly what's going to happen. And then you actually tell them. And this comes into that design in terms of its clarity, but also to make sure that there's a succinctness to what it is we're doing, that we don't over elaborate. If we find ourselves doing that, then is that a time for a pause? Is that time for additional content, perhaps pre-reading material? Are we explaining something in depth? So think that one through, how that happens. That's really important. And then most importantly is the ability to actually pause within session, within a lecture, and say, right, now is the time to engage and activate your learners, to ask them a question, ask them to take a moment to reflect and say, are there any ideas or any kind of prompts that might come up? So with that in mind, I ask you now to put into the chat, what kind of little active kind of learning do you engage in a lecture or could you use in a lecture? What might you ask your students to do? So just take a moment to kind of think about that. And what I will say to you whilst you think is that on average, we know that our learners will kind of stay fixed and focused for about 15 to 20 minutes, after which there's a little bit of a lull. So we all need a prompt, we all need a nudge to re-engage and to kind of think. So it's important that there is time to do that, time to think about what has actually been delivered, but also time to think about the connective thread, about what it is that we're learning or experiencing and how it might matter to me, my assignments, my assessment, and so forth. So I see that nobody has put anything in. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much. PolEV, yes. So the kind of audience response kind of systems. And PolEV, Poll Everywhere, is the one that UCD has for all of us to use. And it's pretty kind of integrated into our slideshows and can be really useful in terms of doing a multitude of things. So thank you very much. Great. Okay, so at the end of a lecture, basically tell them what it is that you've told them. And as I say, set up for success. So make sure there is a sequence, make sure there's a continuity. So it's greet, it's clarity, tell them what you're going to tell them what it is, i.e. the substance of the content, engage, seek out any kind of issues and problems, and then sum up and hopefully connect to the next session that's going to happen. So in terms of actual delivery, a few kind of obvious things. Or perhaps not. So running under, not over. So this is really difficult, and it's really difficult in UCD and in many institutions because where we find ourselves in is a room, we start on the hour, but we finish before the hour. And in terms of room organization, the technical kind of term is that we actually have 47 minutes for a lecture. We don't have an hour. So there's meant to be a 3-minute setup time, and then there's meant to be those 45 odd minutes of actually delivering a lecture. So it's not an hour. So trying to kind of fix our session into, any lecture into kind of those kind of 45 minutes or so is actually quite difficult. There's a lot that we want to deliver. There's a lot that we want to do. So you have to be really careful about how much you can achieve within a given time frame. And what I always say is, be open to engaging the learners and let them grapple with the topic at hand rather than you and I kind of delivering all the information. If there's delivery of information in terms of didactic mode, why not do a little recording? Why not do the readings and kind of annotated bibliographies and use the lecture in a much more engaging way, if possible. So allowing that time for in-session activity. And this is, again, figuring out what exactly that will be. So you need to kind of think about, am I asking them to reflect? Am I asking them to engage? Am I asking them to chat to the peer beside them, to discuss a particular problem? Having something worked out is really important. And having something worked out not only in terms of the actual question, but in terms of what might come back. So are you going to get them to, problem solve? And the question is, do you want the solution, or do you simply want them to engage in the process, i.e. apply something that they've learned? So you've got to figure out exactly what your activity then entails. And most importantly, to bring it back to the group. So there's some kind of plenary summation about, their experience, their kind of delivery. So whether that is a poll everywhere, or whether it's captured to a Jamboard, or whether it's a simple show of hands, all of these things are really important. And to say something about that particular kind of effort and endeavor is really important to do as well in terms of continuation. So the other piece is trying to make students make notes, trying to encourage them to make notes rather than take notes. And this is quite an interesting kind of little deliberation. So often when we deliver a lecture, if it is information heavy, if there's a lot of content, what you will find students do is simply try and transcribe what you and I say. So we want them to kind of shake out of that kind of modality and say to them, well, actually, how can you make the notes useful to you? So whether that's giving them time or giving them prompts, whether it's giving them a visual, a concept map or something to actually kind of engage with, rather than basically doing a transcription, or simply to tell them that, this lecture is going to be recorded and consequently the transcript will be there for you after the fact. So you don't need to take a verbal transcript of what I'm saying, just take the highlights or the points that you want to explore further yourself. So the transcript is there. And in fact, most of us now hopefully realize that if we use a PowerPoint slideshow and we use it through, we deliver it through Office 365, there's a live transcript available that will capture everything and anything that we say. and it's captured for the audience right there and as an after the fact as well. So that's really important to know. So just by word of interest, so in terms of the design piece, I have on the right of the slide a little visual there. Can anyone tell me what the number is in the color chart that you see? And this is really just making sure that the color sets that we use are actually appropriate and fit for purpose. So what number do you think you see in there while squinting? Yes, very good. Okay. Okay. Essentially, very good. So perfect. So all of you guys, oh, we have either or. Interesting. Okay. So basically, this is kind of red-green color blindness. And so if I remember my stats correctly, it is 2 in 7 males are red-green colorblind. And so this is actually quite a common issue. And interesting enough, this particular chart that I chose is one of those problematic ones that it kind of goes across the divide. So hence the kind of 23. So some people do actually, they don't see it clear enough, or as you say, you squinted. So choosing the right colors in terms of our design is really important. So hence going back to simple white and black, or dark blue or whatever, is really important to do. Right. Delivery tips, part 2. So effective communication. And one of the things that we often find ourselves doing is cramming in far too much. And as a consequence, we speed up. And we actually try and kind of get a lot of information across. And in so doing, we lose a lot of our audience. We lose a lot of what it is we're trying to say. And students can't take notes in that instance. So making a conscious pause to actually slow things down and even quieten things down sometimes is really important. And making sure that everyone is actually kind of listening to what it is you have to say. And maybe even consciously slow things down when it comes to something particularly difficult or particularly complex. So you want to make sure that everyone follows what you're saying and how you're saying it. The other part, in terms of actually engagement, is making sure you kind of reach out, that you have eye contact, that you try and speak to individuals rather than kind of looking, up to the high gods of the theatre, or kind of staring down at a particular kind of couple of people in the front. Make sure there's a kind of a broad expanse. And if you can move away from the podium, even better. If you have a roving mic, fantastic. If you've come to one of my sessions, you will often know that I rove the room, whether there's stairs involved or not. And I often don't use a mic, but I'm conscious of that. And I'm kind of throwing my voice and I'm making people follow what it is I say and how I say it. All of that is really important. And sometimes it gives a little kind of a bit of a energy to a session, so that you're not kind of fixed to the podium. You know that you can move. And maybe you move simply to a whiteboard or to another part of the room, just to kind of elaborate on something and engage with a particular group whilst keeping the whole audience still with you. All of that is really important. So consider how you do that. And most importantly, consider what you're comfortable with, because that really is kind of fundamental to actually giving a good lecture, making sure that whatever and however you do it, it's the best thing for you and your learners. And the final one, obviously, is to make sure that you are happy, that you give a kind of exude a confidence in terms of that. And that's why I said that piece about making sure that you are confident what it is you do. And giving that kind of energy is really encouraging, not only for yourself, but also for your learners. And that's a nice thing to be able to do. So I mentioned at the beginning that one of the things that we don't do enough is actually reflect and review the whole process of a lecture. So to make us better as lecturers, we need to be able to kind of reflect and gather kind of data. So what I have here is kind of 2 little kind of go-to points. The first one is that activity that you and I are going to kind of insert into our lecture or our session. And what this does, hopefully, is give us a point to gather feedback about what we've done, and most importantly, how the learners are engaging. So it's not there as a plain and simple, think about this, reflect this, engage with this. It's about, as you do so, you and I are looking to see what is happening. You and I are gathering perhaps the information from said activity, how well they have done, how well they have understood, how well they have applied or not. So consequently, if issues arise, was it the lecture? Was it the information I gave? Was it the direction I gave? How could I improve that the next time round? All of these things are really important to kind of try and capture. And the more data you have in that regard, the better it is for the next iteration in terms of that. The after the fact, again, is also important. So I have taken myself a little kind of activity that I do now. I kind of started doing it bizarrely just before the pandemic. But why I say bizarrely is that I was capturing whatever session I would do, I would actually capture a little kind of, video vignette of whatever it was we had done, whether that was a 3-hour workshop or an hour presentation. I would simply do a synopsis with a video. And what I have found is, so I used to do plain and simple, right, this is what we did in session, and here are the things that you need to do as a follow-up. But doing the video is actually quite nice because I gather all the things that I have done within a workshop, within a session, and indeed what the students have done. So if there's posters, if there's kind of answers to questions, I put them together and I create a little mini video of the session. Invariably, 3-hour workshop probably boils down to about 15, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour if there's something complex that I have to do. But an hour session will boil down always to about 5 or 7 minutes. But in that, as I review and as I gather the kind of information, I'm recognizing what it is I've done, what it is I have received from the learners, how it is I can improve. So as I do that video, I'm consciously kind of saying, right, this is what we did in session, and these are the things that we learned, but this is what you now need to do. This is where you now need to go. And as I do that, I'm realizing these are the things that I could do better the next time. So doing that is really important for you and I as practitioners. And it's a great way of actually, capturing our reflections and our thoughts on any given process. The little screen grab there was actually from a notebook. So ordinarily, I had these notebooks that I had taken in all my lectures. Now, obviously, as an educational developer, I am into this, I am prone to this, but I would say it's something that everybody should do in some guise. And if you think about how it kind of relates from one session to the next and giving that kind of extra directional or extra kind of prompt to our learners, it's really quite fundamental. So don't not do it. Have a go. It doesn't take that long. So as a wrap up, what I would say that you and I need to do is develop our own style, plan, but actually kind of be confident in whatever it is that you choose to do, whether that's staying behind the podium, whether that's a particular kind of slide deck, whether that's a particular modality in terms of I will deliver 15 minutes, I will engage the learners at that point, and then we'll have a bigger activity. Just kind of work out what works best. And that's really important because that makes sure that you are happy and confident in how you deliver your lectures. But most importantly, the plan. The planning of it is key because that enables you to be even more confident in what it is you're going to do and how you're going to do it. But also, the outside of a plan is that if you don't get to do everything that you wanted to do, you know that you can follow on the next time. And you know how you can kind of plug it back in. So that's really important. So I say stick to the plan, but what I always say is that plan is written in sand, and thus you can be flexible and adaptive. So you've got a plan that you're working towards, but you can change it a little bit. You can change it in response to your learners as they engage with something. You can change it in response to timing and so forth and so on. The other piece is to make sure that you do engage the learners beyond what it is you and I share, beyond the narrative and communication that we give. You want some point whereby the learners are activated. And that's really kind of key to any given piece. And the final word is to actually say, relax. So many people are stressed out by giving a lecture, or can be. And I will part with one little interesting story about myself. So I've been lecturing for many years, and in amongst, and to large groups, small groups, to groups of frightening people and to groups of lovely people. But the most bizarre thing that ever happened to me was being the best man at my brother's wedding. And I was giving the speech. And as I stood up to give the speech, my ears turned into white noise and I couldn't hear a thing. But I proceeded to give the speech and I had it written out. And I had it pause. I literally had pause for laughs. And I kind of looked at my notes and I looked around and people, I could see them laughing, but I couldn't hear them laughing. Anyway, it all ended. And the only persons that noticed there was something amiss was I call him the maitre d', the kind of head guy who was basically ready to catch me because he thought I was going to faint. And of course, my wife, who was sitting beside me, kind of going, "What's going on?" So nobody ever knew anything about what was going on in my head or in my ears. And everything seemed to go accordingly well. So in that way, what I'm simply going to say is that, you know, be confident in what you choose to do and be happy in actually doing that. And it'll be fine. Absolutely fine. So enjoy it. That is it. If there are any questions, we will be delighted to entertain. I'm going to stop the share right now and open the floor.